Global vehicle markets are at an inflection point. Prices are no longer responding only to demand and production. They are reacting to policy, geopolitics, and fragile logistics. This is a structural shock that reorders trade corridors and costs. The consequence is faster, opaque, and regionally uneven price inflation. Subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what you are seeing on the ground so you stay a step ahead. Supply chains for vehicles and parts have been rewired over the last 24 months. National security framing has turned routine trade friction into persistent policy action. Tariff windows and targeted export controls now reshape sourcing decisions in real time. Manufacturers can no longer assume steady cross-border flows for components and raw materials. This is why logistics footprints and inventory strategies are changing across continents. Geopolitical competition has moved from tariff shadowboxing to explicit industrial policy. States are actively subsidizing domestic capacity for critical inputs to reduce strategic dependence. Private contracts are being renegotiated with clauses for force majeure and regulatory risk. Ports and inland corridors are reprioritized by governments for resilience rather than cost. That pivot raises transport premiums and lengthens lead times for normal orders. Currency volatility and shifting trade terms compound physical disruptions. Buyers are quoted in multiple currencies and contingency price bands are becoming standard. Sellers hedge not only fuel and freight, but also policy exposures into their contracts. These financial hedges feed back into sticker prices for end customers. Net effect: transactional certainty has declined while headline prices trend upward. Regionalization is real and accelerating in ways buyers did not price in. Manufacturers are clustering supply chains closer to protected domestic markets. That reduces exposure to cross-border shocks, but increases per unit cost. The market is moving from lowest cost sourcing to lowest risk sourcing in many cases. This trade-off is a key driver behind the recent upward pressure on vehicle prices. Manufacturing footprints for heavy trucks are under acute respecification. Producers are forced to choose between fragmented near-market plants and centralized high-volume hubs. Tariff changes make cross-border assembly economically unattractive for many models. Parts that once moved freely across borders now face layered duties and compliance checks. The result is discrete price shifts for fleets that buy medium and heavy trucks. Trade agreements and ad hoc bilateral deals are changing sourcing calculus. Some countries negotiate carve-outs for locally significant suppliers while others do not. Truck OEMs redesign bill of materials to substitute away from exposed suppliers. These design changes take months and lock future costs into product life cycles. Procurement teams are pricing potential tariff scenarios into 5-year amortizations. Logistics capacity for heavy equipment is tightening unevenly. Specialized carriers, port slots, and oversized cargo permits are now strategic bottlenecks. When a major plant reroutes supply, transshipment nodes spike in demand and cost. Those spikes are passed to fleet operators through higher purchase and delivery fees. Maintenance and spare parts logistics follow the same dynamic, amplifying total cost of ownership. Buyers of trucks are responding with defensive strategies. Some fleets are extending replacement cycles to defer purchase price exposure. Others are shifting mix toward locally produced models regardless of total cost. Leasing and rental markets expand as fleets offload capital risk to operators. Pricing volatility is therefore spread across secondary markets and service contracts. Vehicle connectivity is now both an operational advantage and an attack surface. Telematics, OTA updates, and fleet data streams enable efficiency and new business models. At the same time, connected systems invite a higher incidence of targeted cyber operations. Critical subsystems in passenger cars and light commercial vehicles carry telemetry and control channels. This convergence of convenience and vulnerability alters procurement and warranty calculus. AI-driven monitoring platforms aggregate vehicle and driver data at scale. Those platforms optimize routing and maintenance, but also centralize sensitive metadata. Regulators and purchasers now demand stronger attestations on data handling and security. Vendors without verified cybersecurity practices face contract exclusions and reputational risk. Security compliance therefore becomes a non-negotiable cost input in vehicle pricing. Export controls on advanced chips and software are reshaping product architectures. Manufacturers are redesigning electronic control units to avoid embargoed components. Software-defined features that rely on restricted semiconductors are being deferred or localized. That technical substitution increases engineering expense and warranty complexity. End users face either diminished functionality or higher prices for compliant alternatives. Supply chain attackers have shifted from opportunistic breaches to strategic intrusion. Compromise of a Tier 2 supplier can delay hundreds of vehicle builds across plants. Detection and remediation costs, plus mandated recalls when safety is implicated, are material. Insurers are recalibrating policies for cyber-related production losses and liability. Companies now price defensive cyber investments into every bid and purchase order. Consumer-facing surveillance and privacy pushback are creating regulatory friction. Regions promise strict vehicle data rules that limit cross-border telemetry sharing. Where governments demand local data residency, cloud and edge costs rise. OEMs must build parallel data stacks or accept limited features by market. Those compliance-driven costs feed directly into final retail and fleet prices. In the United States, the narrative is immediate and transactional. Consumers see tariffs and policy shifts reflected in showroom stickers and advertisements. Fleet buyers face higher acquisition costs and shorter windows for budgeting certainty. Government messaging frames tariffs as domestic protection policy rather than inflationary pressure. This political framing influences purchasing cadence and public tolerance for price moves. European markets respond to a different set of incentives and constraints. Regulatory rigor on emissions and data privacy shapes vehicle specifications of origin. European buyers are sensitive to total cost of ownership and residual values. EU industrial policy often emphasizes domestic manufacturing and green transition subsidies. That combination both cushions and redirects price pressure toward electrification investments. Asia shows the greatest heterogeneity but the sharpest industrial response. China retains scale advantages and supply integration that lower marginal production cost. Other Asian producers leverage preferential trade arrangements to protect export positions. Where governments prioritize export competitiveness, subsidies offset immediate tariff shocks. Buyers in Asia therefore face divergent price signals depending on domestic policy choices. Emerging markets experience amplified volatility and reduced predictability. Import-dependent countries face sharp currency and tariff pass-through to consumers. Used vehicle markets tighten when new units become unaffordable, creating price spirals. Infrastructure constraints lengthen repair cycles and raise downtime costs for fleets. For policymakers, the choice is often between protecting local jobs and keeping mobility affordable. Part scarcity is no longer hypothetical. It is an operational reality for multiple OEMs. Critical sub-assemblies can be single-sourced because qualification cycles are long. When a supplier halts output, the downstream impact can shutter production lines for weeks. Manufacturers then face the choice between paying a premium for alternate parts or idling capacity. Either outcome raises unit cost and tightens supply for end buyers. Strategic recalls are becoming a tool in a wider playbook. Regulators may compel recalls that align with safety, but also expose geopolitical fault lines. A recall can be used to disrupt competitors who rely on a contested supply chain. The downstream cost of a global recall is both financial and reputational. Firms must therefore weigh accelerated compliance against competitive exposure. Infrastructure failures add another layer of systemic risk. A single port disruption or energy shortfall can cascade into regional vehicle shortages. Maintenance backlogs and constrained spare part pipelines multiply downtime for commercial fleets. Resilience investment in roads, rail, and ports is now an essential part of national mobility policy. Absent that investment, price spikes become recurrent rather than episodic. Finance and credit stress amplify the production shock into a demand shock. Higher sticker prices push buyers toward longer loans or deferred purchases. Credit tightening increases monthly payments and reduces the pool of qualified buyers. Manufacturers may respond with incentives that compress margins and shift risk to lenders. This feedback loop can prolong elevated prices even after supply normalizes. Environmental and transition risks complicate an already crowded risk matrix. Electrification depends on materials with tight supply chains, like rare earths and lithium. Policy-driven acceleration toward EVs competes for the same critical inputs needed in other sectors. A shortfall in critical minerals or processing capacity raises costs across the vehicle spectrum. The strategic contest for minerals therefore translates directly into vehicle price risk. Baseline scenario: tariffs and trade frictions persist at current levels. Manufacturers regionalize production slowly and price increases stabilize at a new, higher baseline. Consumers adapt through longer ownership cycles and increased leasing penetration. Electrification continues, but at a pace constrained by material and chip availability. Policy unpredictability remains the key wildcard that can re-escalate price pressure. Stress scenario: export controls and reciprocal tariffs intensify. Supply shocks become more frequent and targeted, prompting rapid onshoring of critical nodes. Vehicle prices spike in markets most exposed to import duties and weak local production. Secondary markets tighten, and used vehicle inflation becomes entrenched for 12 to 24 months. Government interventions in the form of subsidies and rationing become politically likely. Adaptive scenario: coordinated trade management and temporary tariff relief. Multilateral agreements lower some tariff bans and create clarity on semiconductor flows. Manufacturers accelerate dual sourcing and invest in shared strategic inventory pools. Prices moderate but remain above pre-shock levels due to higher risk premia. This scenario depends on durable policy coordination and transparent enforcement. Technology-driven scenario: rapid software reconfiguration reduces hardware dependency. OEMs decouple features from restricted chips through modular architectures and cloud services. Some premium features migrate to subscription models rather than one-time purchases. This lowers immediate hardware constraints but increases lifecycle service costs. The market bifurcates between function-rich, subscription-heavy vehicles and cheaper hardware-light models. Geopolitical realignment scenario: blocks form around secure supply chains. Countries align procurement to trusted partners and create regional vehicle ecosystems. Trade corridors reorient, and some consumer markets benefit while others face persistent premium. This structural realignment embeds higher logistics and compliance costs into vehicle prices. The political economy of mobility is permanently altered by geopolitical choices. The mobility sector faces a multi-vector disruption driven by policy, technology, and geopolitics. Price spikes are the visible symptom of deeper reconfiguration in supply chains and strategic sourcing. Stakeholders that assume rapid normalization without contingency plans will be surprised. This briefing signals a sustained period of elevated costs and strategic competition for mobility inputs. Treat procurement, resilience, and regulatory strategy as national security imperatives. Stay informed. Stay ahead. Subscribe now and join the conversation below.